Okay.
Hi. So, Camila, I would really love to ask you first what's your name, what's your work, what's your experience, and then you've just come back from COP28, and I want to know what your food and farming hat thinks about the whole system.
Okay, so it's very nice to be here with you. And for those who don't know me, my name is Camila Moreno. I'm from Brazil. My background is in philosophy and in law, and then I have master's, PhD, and postdoc on sociology, and especially looking at the new carbon economy, the bioeconomy, the green transition. I have been working not only as a researcher, but also with civil society coalitions from the environmental movement in Brazil for the past 2 decades. I'm part of a large coalition that has been opposing what we call the financialization of nature, which is the upcoming markets for environmental services as carbon, biodiversity, water offsets, and the like. And in this capacity, I have been participating as an observer in the UNFCCC process in all the climate negotiations, the COPs, but also the substance that are the technical negotiations that happen every year in June in the city of Bonn in Germany since 2008. So I think this COP in Dubai, it was my 15th COP that I attended to. So I'm quite familiar with the process of shaping global environmental governance at the UN level and how this trickles down in national policy. This is what I follow in Brazil, how we translate the new regulatory framework and what are the impacts of all those new laws and regulations and taxes and new markets on the ground, on the production and the economy side of especially small farmers and peasant in Brazil.
So wasn't this the first year that they had food and farming as quite #1 on their agenda? So how is it kind of super speeding up the changes?
Yeah, one important thing to understand is that the whole climate negotiations at multilateral level within parties, no, it moves in a very slow and in a very unique way. So it's like a transatlantic, like a Titanic, going in some direction. So the whole insertion of food and farming as part of the global actions for mitigation, because this is the key point, in the agenda has been going on for a while. There was a work program called Coronivia work program on agriculture. And all this was in a real slow pace because it was opposed by many countries, many developing countries, that we should not, in the context of reducing emissions and reducing the use of fossil fuels, actually to bring the developing world and the least developed countries with their agricultural sector as an opportunity to offset what was the industrial side of the problem or the ones that should be tackled by technology. But in the past 5 years, I would say, the whole thing about nature-based solution as a new narrative started to gain traction. And especially since the Glasgow COP, after the post-COVID era, the whole agenda on agriculture, and especially how they frame it as shifting diets, the whole thing about substituting protein from animals, be it meat or milk alternatives, or even milk and dairy, but also eggs. It was really becoming a big topic of the agenda because of all the startups and the technological advances and the patents that are involved in actually offering this whole new realm of a new generation of products to substitute animal protein. But this year, especially, COP president presidency, the Sultan of the United Arab Emirates, took it as one of his like personal achievements for this COP, the success in approving something related to agriculture. This is somehow the way that the Gulf states are weaving to the African countries that actually cannot shift emissions from industries because they do not have an industrialized structure of their economies, but only in terms of agriculture. But if you look at the details, it of course is a big technological package that is meant to be sold to the developing world. It's like a new green revolution. The FAO is strongly involved in this. This is all packaged within the 1.5 mission, the idea that we need to not only keep the warming to the maximum of 2 degrees compared to the 1850 pre-industrial era, but we have this half degree that will help us with ambition. And to reach this half degree difference, that is like a constant note that you probably heard in the media and the specialized like TV shows talk and analysis on the media, you actually need this plus that only technology can give you. So this means speed up the digital transformation in food and farming, and combines biotech for the seeds. It combines a huge package of drones for precision agriculture, the automation of machinery that is also agricultural machinery that is connected to the new layer of early warning systems for extreme weather events and for meteorological services in general, because then you can also sell to farmers, even small farmers in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, or in African countries, granular, as they say, scale insurance. But this kind of insurance, which of course it's needed in a changing climate, it's connected to people accepting to shift their agriculture and farming practices to one that is vertical integrated with high tech, and of course more markets for this emerging finance related to climate. But if I may add something else, for the middle classes, for the classes that are not, and for the public that is not directly connected to food and farming, the way that the agricultural agenda has been inserted, it's regarding the diets, how to align your diets with climate change. And in this case, we see the IPCC, the Working Group 3, which is not more on the physical science based, but it's the one that is more and more bringing new subjects to the table, prescribing what would be the correct diets, the climate-aligned diets for global population. So I think this we are actually stepping into a very complicated and prescriptive side of how global environmental governance and global climate governance in specific is actually working in tandem with some questionable social engineering in terms of what kind of food systems and food and farming systems are we shaping, and what are the real interests involved in this kind of transformation.
So can you actually give some examples of what you're talking about, both in terms of the changes in food and farming? What type of food and farming do they want the farmers to produce? And what type of eating habits do they want the middle class, all of us, to change to?
Yeah. Oh, of course. I think first and foremost, there is a big push towards indoor farming. I took some pictures at the World Bank Pavilion where they have like the number one they had like a photography prize of the future of agriculture, and the #1 photo was like this inside a big container facility with ultraviolet light, you know, someone like with oriental or Eastern features, dressed as a scientist, you know, in some stairs, just looking like in a lab, this kind of small sprouts that they were cultivating. So I think there is a push for some kind of food that is called soilless vertical agriculture, that does not need sun or even soil to be produced, you know, that you can actually transform it as a new industry. This is very important. We have this constant talk about the deindustrialization of the Western economies as China becomes the factory of the world. But there is at the same time a slow but for sure transformation of food and farming as a new industrial sector, you know, that we are being separated from what were the traditional practices of cultivating the soil regarding our cultural patterns of, you know, diet and ecological management of the diverse ecosystem, into a unified, globalized sector that can compete in producing the few vegetables that are in the interest. But I think also there is a very clear message, and this was very strong also in the Food for Climate Pavilion that was going on within the big expo park where the COP took place, about something I've been observing over the past 4 or 5 years, which is the protein transition. They really want to, and when I refer to they, it's not some conspiracy talk, is the class of technocrats that are within UN environmental agencies, also at the FAO, but also very key people that play within think tanks that internationally feed into ideas for public policy shaping worldwide, but also NGOs heavily funded, dedicated to this programmatic shift in, you know, installing in the public conversation, but also in the regulatory framework, be it in Europe, be it in other countries, that, you know, one major climate action that individual citizens can do, you know, is shift in their diets, because this does not rely on heavy technology, as they say it, or let's say change your car or change your appliances or shift your place of living because of, I don't know, whatever, heating or air conditioning stuff. It's a very basic and worldwide accessible action where all citizens of the world can feel part of the fight of global change, that is, shift your diet. And this message, of course, that could be, we could actually approve it in the sense that, of course, globalized diets that are fully based on industrial protein, poultry, and, you know, factory farming, nobody wants that. We understand all the dangers and all the impacts and how horrible that is. But the point is that the message going forward is that instead of shifting to a more, you know, approachable way of eating locally produced protein with farms and farmers that are sensible to the ecosystem, to the traditions, you know, all the agenda that you have been involved for many, many years, what is being presented to the masses is that, okay, we can produce what you want, that is globalized diets of hamburgers, chicken nuggets, sausages, and the whole McDonald's-like diet that has spread all over the world in the past 20 years, we can produce as simulacrum of the protein. So actually you can use soy, mostly, you know, we know GMO soy, and we can flavor it with fake flavor of meat, of chicken. You know, now they are producing even kebabs and cod and shrimp and even salmon out of this whole plant-based paste, whatever that is, and selling it as a meat substitute or meat alternative. And then, of course, you have the whole generation of milk alternatives we call fake milk, that are also, again, with high environmental impact, even from soy or from the almond monocultures. But you can fake mayonnaise, you can fake eggs out of a very heavily chemical, ultra-processed base. Then you have this whole other generation, which are the meat that is, you can cultivate the very cut without killing the animal. That is, I don't want to get into the subject here because it goes very far, but this is quite a sci-fi also part of the agenda, that you can still eat and enjoy meat, but without the animal, like you just cultivate the very cells. But both of those two emblematic examples of the dystopic future for food and farming, I think they are quite illustrative of how, when people think that governments go to the COP to decide on reducing fossil fuels and cutting emissions, what is being negotiated and what is being like normalized, this is very important, normalized in the agenda, is actually big shifts, big transformative shifts that will impact us more and more as we see how this behavior change is being promoted with new taxes imposed on, for instance, meat. This is the case in Brazil. We just approved a big tax reform that actually will increase year by year the tax on the whole cuts of meat, just to generate for the people that are in this in the context of economic depression and losing purchasing power, to access this new this new generation of foods that are aligned to climate, aligned to the 1.5 degrees warming scenarios, but actually are have been designed by the industry and by the corporate world, and it's not up to citizens to decide and to define what do they want to eat in the future.
So is the type of farming in these vertical farms, is it with GM? Is it with patentable startup products so that the control is with the corporations the whole way through?
Yeah, it's a whole package that is based on biotechnology, extreme biotechnology, I would say, because as you are producing food without, imagine, without sun, without proper soil, and the water and the nutrients that are going to be fed to this, and important to note, they are promoting desalinized water and desalinizing water plants to feed into these new industrial compounds. They are heavily protected by intellectual property rights, of course. It has never meant to be some kind of open source, new global commons kind of food. No, it's to actually be an opportunity to investment, and we see how heavily the international financial system is entering into this new asset class that it's connected to turning carbon in a global commodity, but also the possibility to actually invest in regenerative agriculture. So the name is really beautiful, how to regenerate, but actually you are regenerating your profits, because you pull money from pension funds, even from sovereign wealth funds, and you promote that this is a shift that will inevitably happen in the future. So the first comers, the first ones to invest, will actually secure their place in this global shift that is happening. And if you look closely, Tracy, it's quite sophisticated how they promote it, because they come up with social sciences and behavior sciences surveys and trials that show that more and more younger people everywhere do not find more farming as appealing as before, you know. So if you want to keep young people on connected to the soil, connected to the land, and living in the rural areas, you have to bring in the whole gamification package to make the workforce, to make attractive for the workforce, for the younger workforce. So I saw in this COP, as in the COPs before, in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt past year, and also in Glasgow, this very odd scenes of portraying the farm of the future as some young boys and girls with VR, which is virtual reality glasses, you know, with drone joysticks as they use for gaming, just seeing far away in the fields, you know, how to just drop, you know, agrochemical pesticides, and you kind of make it playful, but it's a way that you don't put your hands on the soil anymore. So you bring the digital world as a new layer into the food production, and this, of course, will even if you look at the countryside and you see small little people, you know, operating drones and joysticks, we know that this is not real farming. This is not the kind of seed sovereignty that I think we both believe that is at the core of regenerating truly ecosystems and have sovereignty over our foods and our diets and our culture.
So it seems to me that this type of new agriculture, all of us, the common sense would say that we need the soil, we like the land, and people to feel that they can farm if they enjoy being with animals and with the soil. So is the whole climate change a veil to make us accept that, oh, we're scared, we don't want to burn the planet or drown the planet, so we've got to accept this new type of farming? So the environmental movement has always got onto that science that we really are causing too much CO2 and creating the greenhouse effect. Really, are we creating this CO2 problem, and to what degree? Or is it part of Operation Mockingbird, which is just a huge con to get us to move to a new sort of agriculture where the corporations are totally in control and making all of the money, and it's making it a very, very insecure food system?
Well, your question is very, very broad. I don't know if I can answer properly in the time we have, but let me say something. I like it very much. You use the word a veil, a big veil, because looking from the inside, and this year was very clear, it's not about climate. You know, the UNFCCC process that actually started with the establishment of the IPCC back in 1988. That is before even the fall of the Berlin Wall, but the first meeting was in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro. So it was after the dissolution of the USSR. So when the world, there was no more like two blocks fighting each other. Climate became the big agenda of, you know, this is the future of humanity. You know, we have one common enemy. It's not more Cold War. Now it's global warming. So there is a thermic shock. But over the past 3 decades and more, the UNFCCC process has been the main body to actually de facto govern the digital transformation, the big digital transition that we are in the fast forward mode since the COVID era. It has all been dragged under the big umbrella of climate. So CO2 and the whole reductionist approach to climate as a CO2 molecule that we can manage, that functions as the thermostat of the planet Earth. I have been very vocal in criticizing how anti-ecological that vision it is, because it actually denies, those are the denials, no? The denial of the complexity of ecological interactions, how ecological regulation and ecosystem are essentially place-based. So this whole narrative of net zero and offset, you need to forget the soil, to forget the land, to forget where you are based and grounded and anchored on, and look to the atmosphere, to look at the air and understand that at the end, everything can be negotiated and exchanged in a cost benefit analysis, or the least expensive. It's always the best, where countries who have money to pay can buy their offset way, can pay for their sins. Buying, for instance, I think you mentioned this in the questions you sent to me. I buy Zimbabwe's right to pollute because they have not contributed yet to the global carbon budget. I also think it's important for us to think of how we use those metaphors, a budget, the accountancy. We bring all the financial system into our ecological reasoning as it is very natural to just make this transition. And we know that nature is not a bank, it should not be a bank. So we should think it is a much more enlivened way. But again, back to the veil, no? So because it's very hard to speak openly about the big transformation we are going through with the coming of artificial intelligence, and then I'm going to go back to this later on, but the automation of production systems, the massive unemployment that is coming our way, how more and more humans are becoming obsolete in the kind of technocratic society that we are allowing to be established. The climate becomes this big veil that we are so afraid of the coming apocalypse, and how do you say the talks about the end of the world, the scatological biblical narratives that we are embracing by science, that we just give our freedom away and we accept the big surveillance and panopticon and censorship regime that is being imposed in the name of climate. Because more and more, you are just excluded from the conversation if you raise any kind of question. For instance, you mentioned CO2, that I refer the carbon as the carbon matrix, as, how we install like a software in our minds that eradicates all kinds of knowledge that can compete with this way of seeing the world. And in this sense, more and more we see how now methane it's becoming a big thing, because it's another gas out of the periodic table of elements, but it's directly connected to food and farming, because methane, it's much more damaging to the atmosphere, but in terms of intensity. But of course, it does not last as long as CO2. And of course, we have a new satellite, the US satellite, that so far is the only one able to correctly measure the methane. And of course, we have the creation of a methane global market. So it's all kind of reproducing the same blueprint to sell more acceptable control, a control that is more and more also selling off the very constellations, the very sky we look upon, in the name of this forthcoming, end of the world narrative that is very, very depoliticized in practical terms.
So do you think the game which we're witnessing is control of our food and the siphoning of the money from the farmers to the corporations?
Yeah, surely the corporate world, it's finding it's like a Disneyland playfield, in the sense that countries are obliged now under the Paris Agreement to design their public policies and how they're going to contribute to the 5-year cycle of nationally determined contribution under the Paris Agreement. as a condition to get access to what was before called development assistance or development money. So now actually countries are being taught and being assisted and actually getting loans to hire technicians and experts to design their public policies already in the format, in the template as business plans. Because if they don't have the public policy as a business plan that is investable, that can be bankable, they will not find these monies in the World Bank, in IMF, but also from the private sector, as more and more we see how the financial system is investing in health, in education, in farming practices, because of course they want to receive returns, and those returns are not in good words or in good deeds, is actually in terms of profit. So I think we are entering in the new phase where the United Nations more and more functions as a brand, is a very legitimate brand, it has a logo, we all think, oh, this is the nice place. But the condition to it continues moving forward, because it's already a 75-year-old system, is becoming the convening power or the convening place for this deal making, matchmaking, how they said, pitch hub, where nation states, they offer in a pitch what is nice to invest on them, and then the corporate world can decide that, oh, I will take you, oh, I will invest on you. So there is no more sovereignty in the sense, because more and more national interests are becoming downsized in the name of the CO2 balance in the atmosphere, whatever that is. And the big issues of our times, like wars, of all the geopolitics of new energy, the big nuclear era that is suffering this renaissance, under the CO2 narrative, we are not talking about that. As we are not talking about what, for me personally, after 15 COPs, was the big issue of the Dubai COP, which was artificial intelligence for climate action, was everywhere. It actually managed to have a dedicated paragraph in the final document, the Global Stocktake, which is the main political document that came out of the COP, and was everywhere in the space. We saw in the main negotiating space, where they had like 12 meeting rooms, there were entire walls covered with digital panels for playing non-stop in looping all the applications of Google AI for sustainability, that actually shows you very clearly that there is a big market for climate products and services that are going to be tapped by artificial intelligence, but it's not any artificial intelligence. It's Google AI, it's Microsoft, and it's Azure platform, and it's also Amazon Web Services that are selling, this web, this cloud space for all those transactions of, gases and numbers and mitigations and whatever you call it.
So we've got 3 more minutes, and I have a question that you might want to spend more time on. So when it does end, I'm going to call you back with Zoom. But could you start, in the meetings, was there very little talk of any actual reduction in the excavation of fossil fuels?
I think there is a very pragmatic approach that we have more than 80% of the global energy matrix still relies on fossil fuels, be it coal, gas, or oil. The fact that since 2008, that I recall, Shell has been working, the Shell, the petrol company, about the Shell scenarios for transition. And for the past 15, 20 years, the gas is being framed as the transitional fuel, because it's still a gas, so we can use the same infrastructure in the future for, as they plan to capture carbon from the atmosphere and actually use it as a new raw material to industry to produce chemicals, to produce plastics. It's a whole alchemical view. But I think what was talked a lot in this COP is the planet fast forward in adopting renewables. And we know for many countries, this means taking loans to buy those new renewable infrastructures, but also hydrogen, which is a complicated source of energy, because you can produce hydrogen out of nuclear. And then out of the hydrogen that you use nuclear to produce, you can produce green ammonia. So actually you can kind of green the whole fertilizer chain for big food and farming, for agriculture, for monoculture, for big pharma, using now this green ammonia. So actually you continue expanding the monocultural model, but saying that it's carbon neutral, that you're using new seeds that are drought resistant or whatever. But I think for me, what is most scandalous is how strong the pro-nuclear lobby is on it. And we have a lot of young people engaged in this new nuclear hype, saying that now it's a new generation that does not show the kind of dangers we had in the past. And it's glamorous. They made it sexy. They sexified the nuclear thing, and are also promoting as the small modular nuclear reactors as a solution to localize energy. And the UK is one of the countries that are really playing very strong in this. So I think we need to deep dive into the contradictions of this transition that is super in fast forward mode after Dubai.
I'll call you back.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye. So was this COP28 actually at all focused on leaving fossil fuels in the soil because of all of their external costs to the planet, not just CO2?
Mm-hmm. Well, this COP actually achieved a historical feat, which was to mention in the global stock take, this very important political document that is the first ever evaluation of what Paris Agreement has achieved since 2015. This reference towards, transition away from fossil fuels. Of course, it does not establish a deadline or says nothing prescriptive, because this was the agreement and the compromise paragraph that they managed to get. And in the same section, of course, it refers to this fast forward towards adopting renewables and phasing out also inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. So those are all agenda items that are quite complicated if you look in how they translate on their national circumstances. Because one thing is the environmental movement, claiming, screaming, and protesting, leave the fossil fuels on the ground now, all the fossil fuels. And the reality of the world economy, and especially the large segments of the populations that live in the global south, and that still rely basically on fossil fuels to live. As we are commenting before, the fossil fuels, the contribution to the global energy matrix, it's beyond 80%. So it's not like this that you just phase out. It needs to be, and in this sense, I agree, as China and others say, it needs to be programmed, it needs to be a stepwise approach, and it needs to be pragmatic. So this whole magical thinking that we would, in one decision just to sign off fossil fuels was not realistic. But at the same time, what is important for people to realize is that this transition phase away from fossil fuels, it's also a big business opportunity for all kinds of technologies related, for instance, with carbon capture and storage, and usage. And indeed, you can capture carbon out of the atmosphere and use the gas to pump in like end-of-life oil wells, and use the very CO2 to force the very bottom of the well to give the last straw of oil that it has. So it's called enhanced oil recovery. And then you started to realize, when you think of the this is just one example of how the circularity of the whole process. So of course we will at some point transition away from fossil fuel in this century, I believe, because there's many new technologies coming, as we referred before. You know, I just mentioned the case of the nuclear and hydrogen, etc. But because it's a big market for the technologies that are in the processes and the services, the green services that are involved in this transition. So I think, in my opinion, it's too simplistic to just think that it's just the use of fossil fuels that have brought us to this situation. And it's just the stop using fossil fuels that will actually get us out of here. Because
what situation are you talking about? Climate change?
About the situation, yes, of having, call it as you want, climate change or earth changes, or this profound imbalance that we live on, that, in my opinion, it's real, but it's an ecological result of many different streams of disturbances that we have created, and they cannot be reduced to one accountable unit of CO2 that is fungible, that we can equate and translate. I think this is not real ecological thinking, you know. But anyhow, so our transition away from the current infrastructure, from the current functioning of this broken system, in fact, it's being led, we are going by the hand of the very same corporations, the very same big philanthropic actors, as for instance Bloomberg Philanthropies, that was super visible within the COP. But also you probably heard about the Bill Gates attending first time ever, you know, this COP, and talking very strongly, you know, how, you know, a corporation with the size of Microsoft can be a player which much more impact than even nation states. You know, of course, nobody doubts of this, but we need to have a more nuanced conversation towards, you know, we are just obsessed about, you know, shifting the fuel. And we are not addressing, in my opinion, the complexity of the social fabric and the model of society that we are helping to deliver and to bring forward with this transition. So we are seeing more and more a normalization, as I said before, of a society that's increasingly urban, you know, because it doesn't make more sense to live in the rural areas, because, as they say, the infrastructure to protect us from the climate extreme weather events, it's much more feasible in the early warning systems within this compact of a smart city in the future than to live in the rural areas. But also the normalization of surveillance, because we accept being surveilled and monitored because of the big threat of climate. And this is becoming part of our very bodies, as the agriculture needs to be constantly monitored for the CO2 molecules, and if it's capturing, if it's removing, if it's avoiding, you know, and all the carbon accountancy, carbon markets related to agriculture. We ourselves, our very bodies, are being connected to this, again, to this idea of governing the climate and governing this ecological transition that corporations are shaping and the financial system is implementing. And this goes hand in hand with very profound debates. For instance, the discussion about the debt, the indebtedness of many countries, developing countries, that do not have fiscal space to actually discuss or think in terms of public budgeting to solve their own needs. So as we're talking before, you have to present your country and present sectors of your economy, be it health or education or farming, as investment opportunities to financial and corporate actors. And this is eroding the sovereignty and the very nature of what is national interest. You were just questioning, how the peasants and small farmers in the developing world are screaming, give me fertilizer, give me fossil fuels, and this appears as a contradiction, because we would like for them to continue their agroecological practices, which are much more integrative and localized way of producing their food. But then it comes the factory farming of imaginaries that are spread through these devices that we use every day, through computers, but also through, let's say, Netflix and all the likes, that actually shape one way to see the modernity, one way to see the developed world. And this is very strong, to counter this kind of propaganda of what a good life is, and how we should prepare and to be more climate resilient. I don't like the word resilient, but anyhow, to the future and what it poses to us.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that the people who are actually shaping the COP meetings are actually the Bill Gateses, the big philanthro-capitalists, and the big corporations and the big banks and the politicians? They all seem to be in lockstep of a sort of global agenda of tech, where all of the money that is sloshing around in their investment portfolios are going into products which they have the patent of. So it's GM crops. It's the GM crops in the vertical farms that they can provide the Malteser of clay that is supposed to give us all the nutrition. And are they encouraging the Zimbabweans to build the vertical farms with the GM? And where is that food going? It's a sort of very centralized system. So all of these boys that are saying, oh yeah, we don't want to be peasants with just a tool anymore. We want the machines and the pesticides, that they've swallowed that sort of Kool-Aid. That's the sort of great way to farm. But I wonder if there is a way that we can persuade them that actually it's not going to bring them sovereignty and healthy food. And were there people at the conference who were saying that from third countries?
Well, this COP, Tracy, it was like the largest COP ever. It was double the size in terms of registered participants. I'm not sure how many at the end up attending, but was like gigantic. Was like, I read somewhere that they had 97,000 people registered to attend on site. How many actually show up there and picked up their badges, I don't know, but it was like impossible. And this is as I said in the beginning, my 15th COP, and I couldn't believe, the size. So as more as I stayed, as much as possible inside the event, maybe I lost a lot of constituencies and discussions. But it's important to be clear that the narrative of this is the warmest year on record, IPCC is predicting that we have this window of opportunity of the next now 7 years, to close the gap within this critical decade. Critical decade is something that is repeated ad nauseum, because in my view, this digital transformation and this digital envision to run on the digital platform and platform capitalism will not work if it's not simultaneous. You need all countries to be on there. You cannot have people behind. And also, this is why leave no one behind is again part of the mantra. So this, what they're building, it's an interoperability among the platforms that can communicate with the mothership, the mothership of UN, the mothership of a global carbon market. And so all this investment that you correctly said, that is financial capital that has been created out of thin air in the financial casino, needs to land somewhere, because it's just thin numbers in a screen, and they need to couple with the real economy. And so they try to buy land. And if they cannot buy land or forests, they buy contracts that give them rights over that land, like carbon rights or payment for environmental services over those lands and ecosystems, because it becomes a new renting way of extracting payments, because you pay for the royalty for the use of the technology, you pay a percentage of the service provider because you're providing fresh water, you are providing habitat banking, you are providing biodiversity offset, you're providing carbon offset, you're providing carbon removal. So this is a new jargon that younger people that are stepping into the financial casino but have been shaped by the green ideology of our times, they think they are saving the world. Maybe like 500 years ago, we had this whole catechesis and the whole going forward of missionary Christians that were part of the colonization process. And they thought they were saving the savages. No, they are bringing the Christian message to other cultures. So now we have again a generation of committed people. I don't think they're all like very clear that they are part of this technocratic engineering at scale of populations and the philanthro-capitalism tentacles. No, they are more aware that there is the IPCC. The IPCC functions as pretty much a religious allegiance, because you don't question the IPCC, although the IPCC, important to remember, they are a body that synthesizes research that is done everywhere. They don't do on the ground basic research. So they sum up and they make the summary for decision makers, for policy makers, and they inform the kind of policy that should be shaped. And this is with the aim of bringing about a world without ideology. As they say, it's science-based politics. So we are not more disputing different ideological viewpoints about how the world and how societies should function, but we are guided by numbers, like, for instance, 1.5 degrees. My critique is that this function is as a very depoliticized force, because the algorithms and the models that they run on the IPCC, they are not neutral. And they are not omniscient in a way that they can factor in all the complexities that happen within social relations and relations of power to produce this mystified equity, because they keep equity in climate, climate justice with equity. So this equity, it's the term they use in financial markets. You trade equities. But societies are very diverse, and people are in there, and there is history above all. And so it's a perverted way of trying to use science, not the scientific method, but the institution of science, as something that in other centuries non-secular societies had towards religion, because it's a theological narrative, that is one size fits all. It's blessed, it's sacred, and you cannot question because it has been revealed. So this is my problem with the shrinking spaces of truly ecological and democratic participation towards what kind of transition do we want. I'm sure that the transition you need in UK, because of the national circumstances of UK, the ecological infrastructure that you have in UK, the population, the diet that is culturally appropriated, is very different from the transition that they need to make in Bolivia or in Brazil. And even in Brazil, where I live, is a continental country with very diverse regional cultures, diverse ecosystems. What we can do in the Amazon forest is very different from the savannas in the south, and from the, you know, it's again, you cannot have one size fits all, one world, one government, corporate response to something that really needs to take care of the ecological diversity and uniqueness of our food systems, but also the agro-food systems that have been built to deal with, to farm, to be engaged in the land. So what my warning is that we have been criticizing the monocultures of the mind, and I remember this was a very groundbreaking book by Vandana Shiva more than 20 years ago, and the monocultures of the mind that correspond to the monocultures of the big pharma thing, they are going to the next level. We're not talking anymore about the traditional GMOs, if I dare to say that. We're talking about gene editing, gene editing at a level that, technology was not able before. And we are gene editing, species, be it for meat production, for protein production, or for seeds. And this has major impacts in the future, and how those interactions are going to happen. But this is not a debate that the younger generations are having anymore about, the dark side of just playing with the genetic infrastructure of our world. So I don't know. I think it's, again, we need to bring the discussion about technology and the transhuman agenda back, or once and for all, to the center of conversation, because it's many layers of massive transformations going on under the umbrella of climate, and we need to peel this onion, because it's like a matryoshka, the Russian doll. Reality is not as you see. You have one level within the other, and that forms the whole of the big issue that we need to deal. And it's being accelerated in a way that I don't know how and in what terms can we forge a social movement right now with the generations that we have that are ready to engage in political process. Because the critique of globalization, that was something that anti-neoliberal globalization, a movement that we had again in the beginning of the 2000s. Today, I see it is very hard to bring about as we had before, because the very climate narrative is, after all, a celebration of globalization. Because the environmental movement that is engaged in this extreme climate narrative, they cannot think outside the box of globalization. The only solutions that they think are reasonable are the ones that push even further the globalization agenda. So I think this is the conundrum, and this is the stalemate that we are right now, and that we think to examine and come with a way forward together, out of this checkmate.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me how much you believe that our burning fossil fuel is contributing to climate change, a lot or a little. It doesn't alter the fact that, yes, the climate is changing and we need to look at a different sort of agriculture. But for me, perhaps the most important thing is to be able to say that the solutions that are coming up by big business and the big philanthro-capitalists is the wrong solution. It is a false solution.
Okay.
So how would you say that the sort of awake should spread the message? Would it be to buy as local as possible from real farmers as possible, using cash, to hold on to our control, which is being progressively removed from us?
Yeah, I would not even say control. I would say sovereignty, basic sovereignty about our body, our food, our local systems of economy. And I think, as you perfectly mentioned, the idea of buying local food with cash, it's becoming something of the past, And I just went to the farmer's market on Saturday, and I took cash with me, and people are, just 2 stalls were accepting cashes. All others were accepting only, digital payment, because it's safer, because it's cleaner, and it's just because it's the new normal, and something odd is to pull out some like colorful piece of paper and try to use it as money. The very essence, the very nature of money has been deconstructed. My niece, which is 10 years old, she hardly is, I can leave money around, because she doesn't see it as something that she can go to the supermarket, because for her, or to buy some candy, for her, supermarket is to have a card. Card is the money, and more the very cell phone, where you can pay with your cell phone is the money. So it's a very profound shift.
Yeah, I'm a little bit worried about the fashionable regenerative agriculture word, when actually they are permitted to use genetically engineered crops. They can use glyphosate. There's no rules, whereas we've got a system called organic, which is serving us very well. And is that a part of this corporate veil?
Yeah, I think the regen, in fact, regenerates the big agribusiness more than anything. And for me, the big difference regarding the regen brand is that it's all based in this new carbon finance. So actually, you keep on the practice you had before. You may bring some, I don't know, ammonia made out of hydrogen, to keep feeding your monoculture. But the big difference is that you have access now to a whole new package of finance and insurance, very important, the insurance, that is coming not from the traditional channels that you had to finance agricultural policy in nation states, but you are accessing this new venture capital funds that push forward, the decentralization of the control for farming. And this has wide implications, because let's say you have a government in UK, you elected, that is financing some kind of change in the farms that people don't agree. And then the next election, they vote them out and they want to change. You can only change when the nation state still has some control about the financing of food and farming. If you change the government by a democratic election, but all the food and farming in UK is already on the hands of this venture capital that is decentralized, that I don't know, maybe it's in Singapore, maybe it's on the Emirates, maybe some parties in Wall Street, doesn't matter that you change the government, because the finance is not public finance anymore. It's not connected to stages of control within your very country. So at the end, the democratic process, and this is happening in different sectors of our economy, in health, especially with telehealth, it's going forward really fast. What's the point of changing the elected officials, because you don't have the control about the structure? So I think this is the big thing with the regen agriculture, that is, it's becoming a cool place for venture capitalism and new and emerging extreme tech, as for instance, AI, automated systems for farming, for spraying pesticides, for, we have AI automated systems for war. So why not, to expand those? And I mean, I'm not promoting this, to be clear, I'm just being ironic here, that this is becoming the new thinking, instead of leaving to the margin of error of humans and their petty interests and petty fights, why not just give the control and the governance to AI wise and science informed overarching systems, and I think this is the big threat that comes with the narrative.
I think it's very frightening when you've got your food in the hands of a system which is mechanized with AI and the sort of Internet of Things. There's no farm shop up the road that actually has the food that's grown locally in case all of that collapses. So in the 6 minutes we've got left, maybe you could explore what instead we should be doing in Britain to make sure we have these real farmers in Rio and in the Zimbabweans who are being bribed to come away from small-scale farming.
Well, from the Zimbabweans, I cannot talk deeply because I'm not from Zimbabwe, and I think it's very complex to analyze this conundrum of the national circumstances, and especially looking at the recent history of Zimbabwe and everything that happened there. But I agree entirely with you that the big threat, if the system collapses, how we're going to feed ourselves, and what is the alternative. I think the alternatives is going back to the basics, and the basics is land, the land, the seeds. Now we cannot forget about the control of seeds that we can keep, that we can reproduce, that we can freely exchange, is the basics of everything. We need to have the animals back on the land because they are our fertilizers, and we need to have people that can have the knowledge how to deal with the systems. And of course, the whole water thing that is, essentially, when I talk about land, it's also with water. This cannot be solved in terms of the massiveness that we need unless we start to address the need to de-urbanize, because urbanization is not only our physical urbanization, that we move to London and start to enlarge big cities, but there are people that are still in small cities, but they are urbanized in their mindsets. And what we need is to recover what is this rural pace of life, the rural ethics, the rural, the cycle of nature, the cycle of the year, the festivities. Now we were going to have the equinox, the solstice. Those are all, the calendar that we needed to have to synchronize ourselves with the land, with nature and its cycles, and planetary cycles, and solar agriculture and lunar agriculture. There are different traditions in the East and the West that have been taken very seriously, long-term patterns of climate change that happened in the past, and we need to learn how to live with them, because we are not, super powerful entities that can shift the entire climate, of the planet, but we can manage with our hands and our knowledge the local, and rebuild the local conditions for a climate. And instead, we should not focus on megalomania infrastructures of technological geoengineering or carbon sequestration at scale, because those are doomed to fail, and those are very energy intensive, reliant. And we could start right away with changes that are within our capacity and rely on a human scale. Because I think at the end, if we are really fighting, our big fight, at least is my big fight, is against the transhumanist agenda. I think first commandment is to return to the human scale, because it's only within the human scale and the human scale of a human time lifespan that we can rebuild meaning and cohesion and fabric for the society that will need to rebuild from the madness that we are towards a different, truly regenerative and truly sovereign and emancipated way of living back in the land.
Yeah, to reconnect to each other, to reconnect with communities, to know where your food has come from, to know that you're a part of nature. Must have been very frustrating for all those indigenous tribal people who were at the conference to hear them carry on with this extraordinary way of thinking that we can survive on this planet, so distanced from what we are, which is a part of the web of life. And yet it's, for me, it's just about power and control with the psychopaths that have managed to get to the top of the pile, and those that question it lose their jobs, they lose their mortgages, they can break up the family. Everybody seems to be somehow locked in, and it's not always voluntary. And I've got people who say to me, you know, I can tell the truth, but not for another 15 years when I retire. It's like we're all becoming slaves to the system to hold on to our jobs. And it's time to just slowly boycott, you know, divest and basically take back control. And I think that your words have been invaluable in that road. So thank you so, so much. And especially for going and putting up with those sort of halls of horror. Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you,
Hope to
dear.
see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.